Hello there, and welcome to the Impact Zone podcast. We are back once more to talk more TNA wrestling shenanigans. And today I am discussing how you can define some people's legacies. Now, I think some people fall into a very neat little box that you can easily define their legacy and their heritage and whatever else that they've done in professional wrestling. Look at Ric Flair. Like, maybe you could say, oh, yes, maybe WCW, but WCW was really an offshoot of the NWA, and Ric Flair was more of the 80s, and, like, WCW was more into the 90s. Yes, Flair was there during the 90s, and he did do some great stuff, and he had a great legacy. But you could also still say, well, again, WCW was an offshoot of the NWA. But again, you can easily define him to that same sort of lineage. He was an NWA, WCW guy. That's it. Like, there's no real debate that's what he was. Like, even though that he had runs in WWE and he did some stuff in WWE, even in the early 90s, I'm not even talking about his later stuff and whatnot, but still, like, even with that later run, you still couldn't ever really call him a WWE guy. He wasn't a WWE made man. WWE didn't make him. Yes, they featured him, but he was already a superstar of the highest order in the professional wrestling world at the time that he really came in. Even in the 1990s, he was still one of the top guys that was ever in the industry at that time. So again, like, people forget that sort of thing, that his real legacy, that's what it is. Like, it's easy to define what his legacy is. There's a few people that are like that. Obviously, San Martino, WWE guy, well, WWF guy, but whatever, same, sort of thing, they just changed the name of the company, and that's semantics. I'm not going to go through all that because it's one of those things. But again, there's no doubt that he was, like, a lot of these people, originally, especially back in those days, was part of the NWA. Probably got, I don't know that much about San Martino, but he probably got his start, in that North American area where, the WWF at the time, or whatever it was formed. That's probably where he was wrestling anyway. So, and a lot, they were, I think, from what I remember, they were actually pushing for Bruno to get the belt. And I don't remember who was the champion at the time, but they basically said no. And they said, well, we're just going to make our own belt effectively because we want the world champion to be here. And that was a very big political game back then. Who got to have their, region's guy be the champion. And that's, that carried on for many years. And even the AWA broke away and all that, but I'm not going to go into all that and whatnot. But still, like, you can see where, like, these different sort of territories and whatnot, or these different organizations, they started to try to define themselves as a different company and as a different entity, not just, oh, yes, we're the part of the NWA. Like, yes, back in the day, like, you might not have been part of the NWA, but that started up pretty darn quickly after a lot of, professional wrestling territories started forming in the early days there of the sort of boom period of professional wrestling, and whatnot. So, but yeah, again, like, there's a lot of guys that are on the opposite, scale of things. It's hard to define what their legacy is. Like, are they this guy? Are they a WWE guy, or are they a, this guy, or whatever? Look at Samoa Joe. He's like one of the prototypical guys that I would say it's really hard to define whether what he actually is, what really made him. And in my opinion, I know what it is, but like some people will say, well, he wasn't anything until he went to WWE and that sort of thing, but then again, he really didn't do a whole lot in WWE. So even though that he got to that very mainstream level, some people still didn't really get the whole picture or get the idea of what this guy was about or whatever and whatnot. But again, was he a Ring of Honor guy? Because that's where he got his first big break, realistically. Then TNA got a hold of him, and he did a lot of great stuff there. Then he went back to Ring of Honor, I believe, after that, and then he went to WWE, and now he's with AEW. So it's like, and he's already been the champion over there in AEW. So it's like he's won championships, I believe, in 3 major or semi-major promotions. So it's like, and I believe he even went to New Japan. I don't know how much success he had over there. But yeah, it's tough to define some of these guys to say, oh, well, they were this or they were that, and some people's legacy can continue on into different companies. Looking at Nick Nemeth right now, and I was thinking, what guy is he? Where does he fall into these things? Because it's like, yeah, it's very clearly he's a WWE guy, very clearly, but thing is, now he's in TNA, and he was in NWA, New Japan, sorry, I dyslexiaed myself there thinking about it. I think he was in NWA, wasn't he? Maybe he was, maybe that's why I was thinking of the NWA. But anyway, yes, maybe I was thinking of Cardona, actually, that might have been it. But anyway, yeah, he was in AAA, and he was in New Japan, and in, I believe he still is in AAA in New Japan. But he's also in TNA. So right now he's doing some of the indie stuff, and doing some TNA stuff. So it's like, he definitely has that legacy of being a WWE guy because he was just there for so goddamn long. Yes, he didn't really do a whole lot there. He did win some titles and he did do some stuff. Certainly, I'm not going to take anything away from him or whatever, but he could have been given so many more opportunities over there in WWE, but they didn't know what to do with him or didn't want to do anything with him, so they just didn't. It's just one of those things. That's how it goes sometimes. But yeah, it's hard to define some people as they're this or they're that, and that's one of those things. It can be all right to be like, well, I'm not sure. Look at Lashley as one of the best ones. I think, Lashley, when he was in WWE, the first time, he really was, not really ready, I don't think. He was, and perhaps they didn't really present him in the right way either. They should have known, okay, this guy, is a bit bland and he can't really talk really well, so, let's give him a mouthpiece. But the problem with that is, having a mouthpiece often leads to being more of a heel and whatnot, or having a manager often leads to being more of a heel. But I think McMahon was so high on him and that he was so jacked and whatever else and all that it was just he was going to push him as a babyface. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it would have just been better for him to be being a heel, because it would have meant, or might have even meant that he just had a mouthpiece. I don't know, but it's still it's just one of those things. At least it would have helped him character-wise and with some of that stuff and whatnot. But even so, saying that, it's well, in WWE, in the first time he was there, he was oh yeah, he's there and he did some stuff, like I said. But you couldn't call him a WWE guy. He did some stuff there, and he was Vince McMahon's project for a little while, but it just wasn't working because he didn't have the charisma, he didn't have the experience, he didn't have the knowledge needed to really fulfill that role. Went away, went to TNA for a little while. I think he did some indie stuff as well, I'm not too sure. Went to UFC, did some stuff there, then came back to TNA, and that's when TNA got a hold of him and actually made him into their guy, pretty much, really. And after that, he went back to WWE. So, in my opinion, and then I'll sort of say this before I, say anything else, but in my opinion, before I say my opinion or whatever, WWE took 2 years to do anything with him of any real significance and to present him in the way that he probably needed to be presented. So in my opinion, again, it's like he was a TNA guy, really. And you could make this argument with Kurt Angle. Like, is he a WWE guy or is he a TNA guy? Because he was in TNA almost as long as he was in WWE, certainly as a in-ring guy or whatever. And I should talk about the girls as well, I guess, as well. I shouldn't just talk about the guys. Mickie James is obviously like a WWE gal. She went to WWE and that's where she got most of her success. A lot of people don't remember that she was in TNA before that. Yes, she didn't really do a lot back then because the women's division really wasn't a thing back then. And whatnot, but still, she came back to TNA after being in WWE and being somewhat successful, I guess. I don't know. They always treated, in my opinion, they always treated their women pretty badly over there in WWE, even when they were trying to do their, like, quote unquote, do their best with what they had over there. I don't think they knew what they were really doing. I think they still had too many cobwebs of the Attitude Era sitting around and too many ideas of people being like bra and panties matches and, mud matches and whatnot. So, yeah, anyway, you've got to admit that, definitely she made her name over there more so in WWE. She won the Women's Championship like a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. I can't really remember because I think she won it later on as well. I can't really recall now, but I know she won the Divas title as well. That very infamous feud she had with Michelle McCool and whatnot. But one of the things I actually wanted to go back to that at some point because I think it's actually just like it's a little bit over the line, but I think that's what wrestling should be sometimes. I don't know. It's really tough, but I just think it was like the idea of it was a bit, out of whack because Mickey wasn't fat at all, and it was like, well, really, it was like, damn, you think she's fat, bro? What the fuck? But anyway, but that's that thing that you come into sometimes, like. You ask yourself, is AJ Styles a TNA guy or a WWE guy? I think he's definitely a TNA guy. You can't really assume to say that he's a WWE guy. He did some stuff in WWE, certainly, and he did some great stuff in WWE, certainly. But his legacy, if you ever ask anyone what was AJ Styles all about, it would be his, run in TNA that, he became the focal point. He became the face of the company and everything. So it was just one of those things. He was Mr. TNA. Like some people will say, oh yes, Sting had a resurgent career in TNA, and whatnot. But yeah, certainly his career is definitely defined by WCW. He was in the NWA, and I guess he won the title there as well, but, his huge amount of prominence really was more in WCW. You obviously think of him being a WCW guy, per se. Hogan's a bit hard. I don't want to go through every single wrestler, but obviously, like, he was in the AWA as well back in the day, and he was nearly like the top guy there for even like a year or so, I think it was, that he was chasing the title or whatever it was. I don't remember. I don't know. I haven't really looked it up that much, so do correct me if I'm wrong, whatever. But certainly, no. Obviously, his career peak in many ways was in WWE, and then he rode that in WCW, and elsewhere and whatnot. So though he did have a very like resurgent part of his career kind of later on in that, you know, or not really later on, I suppose, because he had another couple of runs after that as well. But he certainly had a more interesting run as a heel and in the NWO and whatnot, and then that kind of petered out or whatever. But we're not here to go through all that stuff, whatever. But again, that's sort of like, you know, how are you going to do? When are you going to do? You know, like type thing and whatnot. But anyway, he had to do those things. You have to do those things to remain relevant, because that was, like, in my opinion, if you were looking at it as a perspective of a fan, this was probably, you know, his last major run over there and whatnot. You know, he might have matches and moments and little things and whatnot here and there in the future after that, yeah, sure, but, you know, he'd really run his course by virtually by that time, you know, by the time he was dropping the title to Goldberg and whatnot, you know. So it's like, you know, this is time to start thinking, right, what's the last match? What's the last feud? What's the last, you know, big things that we can do with him? Or what small little things that we can do with him here and there, you know, over a period of time that, you know, you can do stuff with him, because, as I say, you know, your legend's already made. You know. I think, did I really talk about Kurt Angle? I already sort of talked about Kurt Angle, but I'll talk about a bit more about Kurt. But, you know, he really rose to prominence in WWE. Like, it's hard to say that he wasn't a household name to some extent in WWE, certainly. But I don't know. I don't want to get too close to that, because it's kind of like very tough, because it's like, you know, I don't think he was on the level of like Steve Austin, The Rock, even Triple H, as far as the level of like popularity. I think, like, obviously it's a top level guy as far as a wrestler is concerned, absolutely, and he's certainly a top level wrestler as well, just in being one of the best wrestlers in the world. He's a great character and he can do a lot of great stuff, obviously. But again, it's like, I think he was very, very overlooked, and I think maybe he came in just a little bit too early, realistically, and he really because he came in during the end stages of the Attitude Era, which probably was not the best time for him to come in. He probably fit a bit more in the Ruthless Aggression Era. I always think of his time with Lesnar and Guerrero and the SmackDown 6 and whatnot and that sort of thing. So, he had some really great moments there as well, but he's also got overlooked a fair bit, I think, and they didn't really quite know what to do with him at times. But also, I get that they're trying to make other stars, and perhaps they were of the perception that, well, this guy's kind of had his time and he's kind of done his thing and it's run his course, and, well, that's pretty much all we can kind of do with him. So I get that, but having that, still very active and still very good wrestler on your roster and not giving them, they don't have to be the champion all the time, but just giving them good programs and good things to work with and good time and good young talent to work with as well, because again, that not only helps the young talent that's going up against them, but it helps the veteran sort of, keep relevant, because they've got to be doing something. And this is one of those things that I really wanted to talk about really, really quickly. Was I think there's a few things that I think, back in the day, like you talk about the WWE New Generation era, I think that was actually kind of an interesting and good idea. I just don't think that it was executed very well. Because what in my opinion, you should have had was something like the Main Event Mafia. You should have had that new era with like guys like Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, these sorts of guys, Diesel. You can't make them solely a faction, but again, like just having that perception of these are the old guard, these are the new guard type things, like getting that entrenched into people's minds, like would have been a really good feud, like or even if it was singles, like to start with, you have Macho Man Randy Savage, and you have some of these other people, you have Jake the Snake Roberts, you have some of the like those other people, and then you have like Mick Foley and Stone Cold Steve Austin and this sort of thing. So you have those old timers there, kind of, and old timers in quotes. But again, you have those guys that have kind of been around for a while. They really haven't done a lot to some extent, or a lot of them haven't done anything to some extent, but they've been there. And like Roddy Piper, look at Roddy Piper and Bret Hart. That was actually a very well executed angle. In a lot of ways, it was a transition for Hart to beat somebody the level of Piper, and to give Piper sort of a last hurrah out there and whatnot. You know, it didn't turn out that way. But again, like, I don't think you talk about Piper going to WCW. I don't think that was a bad idea. And I don't think it's a bad idea for some of these people to move on to other companies. I just think this is something that I notice a lot with people criticizing, TNA or AEW, and I'd criticize them sometimes too. But again, both companies, by the way, and same with WWE. But I criticize them for different things. But again, they sometimes over rely on not just WWE guys, but guys that are legacy talent, established talent, or talent that are getting a lot older. And you need those older talent. I've said this before here and there and whatnot, and that sort of thing. But you need those older talent, because you need those older talent to help the young guys get over, gain experience, gain knowledge from, even in the locker room, like even if they're not on TV, have them in the locker room and telling the young guys and helping some of these young guys get to where they need to be is the thing, like it's all up to them for the next few years, really. But having some of those veterans, or some veterans, like they brought back Bob Backlund, I think that was, in the end, it was kind of a good idea, and it kind of worked out, and it was kind of a renaissance for him. I don't think it really lasted too long or whatever, but I think that sort of thing could have worked, if you had just told the story a bit better, or if, the fans weren't so like, oh, what's this guy doing back here? Like, he's from he's from like 2 or 3 decades ago, or whatever it is. He hasn't even been wrestling here for a while. Like, what's he doing back here? So again, it's a slow process sometimes for fans to, catch up with that sort of thing, and like debuting somebody or re-debuting somebody at the Royal Rumble using those platforms that are, usually made for these sorts of returns or moments or whatever, and that sort of thing. So again, having that in the mind and having the perspective of let's go, let's get it, it's one of those things. It is useful to have these guys have some of that, wonky history. I don't know. What do you want to call it? I mean, like, because you can't, like, I think a lot of people just say, "Oh, I'll just retire," or whatever. But that's not how it works. Really, like, look at the Hardys, and again, like I say, you could argue somewhat that they're, well, at least especially like their broken characters are TNA, really. But you've got to acknowledge that there's certainly WWE guys as well. So it's one of those things. Having them, and they were still very capable when they were, especially like 10 years ago, whatever it was. But they're still pretty capable now, like. So, and it was funny to me that they haven't actually, been on TV since they won the tag titles. But I suppose they're going to North Carolina there to do something there, and to, whatever, cheer and wallop and whatnot or whatever. But anyway, like, again, bringing in outside established talent isn't a bad thing, but it's just kind of interesting sometimes, and it's like some of them can fit, some of them can reinvent themselves, as I've sort of said here. But some people can't. They can't really. Well, they kind of whatever. It depends. Like, you've got to give some of these guys the chance. Like, they've got to get significant wins. That's one of the first things. Or they've got to come through again. You can't just be playing the same old fiddle that you were playing. And, like, again, some people complain about people, sort of saying, oh, the WWE or whatever, they screwed me over and whatnot. Well, that's their story. That's their real story. What's their real story is that the WWE screwed them over and that they never really got a fair shake of the stick. So obviously that's their story. It's like, people complain about that sort of thing. It's like, well, no, because, that's real. That's their story. What else story do they have? They certainly have more of a story than that. But certainly most recently, when they've just left WWE, and it's like, well, they didn't do anything with me. It's like, well, obviously your story is, they screwed around with me and they didn't know what to do with me. Or they didn't care what to do with me because they were just too focused on, the one person or this one person that, Vince McMahon had a boner for, or whatever, effectively, So, yeah, but, yeah, I think, like, when you do come to a new place, like, obviously people know you from what you've done in the past, and you've got to have some of that, obviously, to, that extent, because you can't just be a completely different, well, you can be, but, like, people will know you, especially when you've been on the biggest stages in wrestling or in sports entertainment or whatever you want to call it. But again, people will know you. They know your story. They know where you've been. They know what you've done. Wrestling fans are very knowledgeable about, what's, going on, even behind the scenes and whatnot sometimes and whatnot. So again, coming in and not thinking, okay, the fans are going to know, hey, the perception is this or whatever. I was a big loser. I was a big mid-card guy that just put everyone over, etc. Whatever it is. I was just a tag team guy or just a good hand or whatever. So now I've either got to completely go with that, keep that perception kind of going and play off my own kind of, paranoia or whatever, to be like, it's not going to happen again, or whatever. Or come in with that perception of, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to run roughshod over everyone and go crazy and all this or whatever. I'm not going to take no for an answer or whatever. You've got to start from a space of saying, well, what's the perception and what am I going to work with? Why am I going to work with that? So yeah, I think it's really interesting for wrestlers to try to, do that, of going, okay, I am a WWE guy. Obviously, I'm coming to this new promotion, whatever, So now what am I going to do? And like, if you're, like I was saying with Nick Nemeth and a couple of other people, if you're in New Japan and if you're in TNA and if you're in AAA or whatever else it is, it's like, well, maybe in AAA I'll do this way, and maybe in New Japan I'll do it that way, and maybe in TNA I'll do it another way, like you could tell different stories all kind of happening all at the same kind of time, which is kind of really cool and really interesting. In many ways. So, but yeah, I think, like, overall, like, just labeling somebody a, WWE guy, that's, like, obviously were very successful in WWE, so therefore they're a WWE guy or gal, whatever. Their most success has come from there, obviously, or whatever it is, TNA, wherever, WCW, ECW, whatever. But just saying, oh, they're just that is just pigeonholing them into that and not seeing what they can do now. Certainly when you're saying these are an established talent or an established star that's coming in, that's cool to see these established stars coming in and doing something. But it's like, well, we don't want to just see these established guys. We want to, obviously people want to see them, but we want to see new, young, and up and coming guys, not just these guys that we've seen for years and years, because, you can't run forever, or whatever. Like, you can't keep it going forever and ever. You've got to know, okay, well, what are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? How, again, how are we going to keep being relevant and whatnot? So I think it's really interesting. But anyway, guys, you guys could let me know about specific wrestlers or specific areas of this that you've kind of seen out there, or ones you might want to debate or whatever. But yeah, I certainly think that we could go deep diving on just about anyone and everyone that has a, not checkered past, but a past that's like, oh, are they a AEW guy? Or are they this guy? Start saying, well, is Cody Rhodes an AEW guy, or is he a WWE guy? Like, where did he really get his success from? Or was he really just a self-made man on the indies? Like, you can make some of these arguments, and I mainly want to talk about TNA guys, of course, but again, like, if there's anyone out there, we can certainly discuss it to some extent anyway. But anyway, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this one, and I hope you will join me again in another one.